Chapter 1. A Name in the Morning. Frost Emsworth lay hushed, as it often did in late autumn, when the air grew sharp and the world seemed to hold its breath. The leaves had long since curled and dropped, leaving the trees like skeletal hands clawing at the sky. That morning, a frost so thick it seemed to freeze time itself blanketed the village. It was a Wednesday, and Mrs. Edith Perman, who faithfully delivered flowers to the parish each week, noticed it first. She climbed the narrow hill to Fairweather Cottage, clutching a modest bouquet of marigolds and eucalyptus for the window box, a habit she couldn't shake. Though the cottage had stood empty since Thomas Gibbons died over a year ago, his distant niece in Kent never bothering to claim it. The gate hung slightly ajar, rusted. The path glistened with frozen dew, but it wasn't the cold that stopped Edith mid-step. It was the window. She mistook it for Frost's delicate handiwork, feathery patterns and crystalline vines etched across the glass. Then she leaned closer, eyes narrowing. There, unmistakable as a signature in snow, was a name, Emily, not traced by a fingertip, carved with something sharp, precise, deliberate. Edith stepped back, the bouquet slipping from her hands. She didn't scream. She wasn't the sort to fuss, but her knees trembled as she turned and hurried down the hill. By noon, the village was alight with whispers. The name passed from lips to lips, murmured in shops, muttered over garden walls, pondered in warm kitchens. Emily, one said. Emily who? Another asked. Emsworth had known Emily's Emily Rowe, the school teacher's wife. K. Emily Croft, who tended the flower stall. K. But it was the third, namely taller, that sent a chill through every heart. Emily Taller, the quiet girl with the pale hair who lived by the mill pond with her father. One day, she'd been buying currant buns at Kingsley's bakery. The next, she was gone. The story was, she'd left for cousins in Surrey. No one had seen her since Dotney. Almost exactly a year later, her name appeared, etched in the frost of an abandoned cottage's window, like a ghost's breath made visible. It was Miss Jane Marple who voiced the question no one else dared. She was speaking with the vicar's wife, who'd stopped by with leftover scones from the choir bake sale and a heart full of gossip. Surely, a coincidence, Miss Marple. A prank, perhaps? You know how teenagers are. Miss Marple, seated in her sitting room, a ball of pale blue yarn in her lap, paused her knitting. Her eyes, calm as the teacup beside her, lifted. Why, today? She asked softly. It might be coincidence, she said, but I've always believed that coincidence in small villages are rather like mushrooms in spring. Too many at once, and you are bound to find something poisonous. Mrs. Lennington blinked. You'll think it's something serious. I think it's something someone wants us to remember. That afternoon, Miss Marple went out walking, bundled in her dove gray coat and pale scarf. Her steps were measured, her eyes, though framed by age and gentleness, missed very little. She passed the butcher's warion. Hugh Traynor, the constable in training, stood outside, trying to look busy while clearly listening to old McGreen ramble about symbols and omens. She passed the post office where Mrs. Blundell was writing down a list of all the Emilys she'd ever known. And finally, she passed Fairweather Cottage. The path was quiet. A few children's boot prints dotted the grass. Nearby, a crushed milk bottle lay by the gate, still uncollected. The frost had begun to melt. The glass was misty smeared where Simeon had tried to wipe the window clean, but Miss Marple saw at the 5-test outline of the letters. The name had been scratched so firmly into thick condensation that even sunlight couldn't quite erase it. Emily stayed there only a moment, then turned and walked back the way she came, her mind clicking through memories like pages in a book. When Miss Marple returned home, she placed her gloves gently on the tabling, sat down at her writing desk, not to write a letter as one might expect, but to pull open the drawer on the left and remove an old newspaper clipping jillowed slightly at the edges, carefully preserved young woman missing. Emily Toller leaves without a trace. She reread it slowly, the words Ashart now, as they had been 11 months ago. At the time the village had mourned and enacted its own unspoken way. Emily had been quiet, yes, but not enlightened. She helped her father with the gardening, volunteered at the harvest fair, bought 3 books every fortnight from the second-hand stall. There had been no warning, no goodbye. Some had speculated she'd run off with a lover. Others hinted at family arguments. But Miss Marple even then had suspected something else, and now here it was her no mere turning on the breath of winter. Miss Marple rose and lit the fireplace. Outside dusk had begun to settle over Elmsworth, throwing long shadows across the cottage walls. A barn owl hooted from somewhere by-end. The trees, the village lights flickered on one by one like timid stars. Didn't yet know what had happened to Emily Toller, but something had been set in motion, and Jane Marple, with her lifetime of observation, quiet deductioning, deep understanding of what lies beneath politeness, knew that this was no prank, no coincidence, no child's mischief. Someone had carved that name not to Beckleaver, but to be seen, and soon the truth would begin to surface like frost melting on glass. Chapter 2, the curtain that never closed the next. Morning brought fog, not the light ghostly mist Elmsworth was used to, but a thick, soupy veil that clung to the village like damp wool. The fields beyond the churchyard vanished entirely, and even the familiar light line of the bakery looked like a vague shadow. It was the kind of day that muffled sound and made people walk a little faster, heads down, collars up, as if the air itself had secrets it didn't want. Overheard Fairweather Cottage sat in sid fog like a forgotten memory. Its tiled roof dripped steadily from thawing frost, and the garden gate, still rusted, still ajar, creaked softly and the wind passed through. But what most people noticed as they walked it be, little quicker than usual, was the window, not the one at the front with the name carved in frost. That pane had been wiped almost clean. Benno leaving. Only a faint ghost of letters, no, the real unease, came from the side window, the one above the kitchen. The curtain there didn't close properly. It hung crooked, as if caught mid-movement. One edge was pulled too far to the left, the other sagging like a tired eye, and behind it, some swore they saw a shape. Not a person, not exactly, but something that shouldn't have been through the outline of a figure, seated still as stone to still, and that in a village like Elmsworth was enough to send rumors flying faster than telegrams. By midday, the police had air of a detective. Inspector Graham Flint came from Broadhurst, the nearest market town, a tall man with a tired mustache and a voice that carried authority. Even when barely spoke above a murmur, he surveyed the property with a grim, eye-making, careful notes in a small, battered notebook. Constable Hugh Traer, youngest, always 3 steps too eager, trailed after him like a loyal spaniel, tripping occasionally over his own bootlaces. The gate creaked again as they passed through it. The garden was overgrown, but not wild. Someone had trimmed it recently, someone who knew what they were doing. Ivy had been hacked back the path, half swept. A faint smell of rosmaringuard in the air. The back door was ajar again, not kicked in, not forced, just quietly, unmistakably open. Inside, the air was musty, damp, clung to the corners, and there, in the parlor chair beside the cold fireplace, was the body, a woman, thin frame, head tilted to one side, no visible wounds, a cardigan, red woolen, folded neatly across her shoulders. Her eyes were closed, her expression peaceful. It was not the peace of sleep. Flint didn't speak for a long time. He crouched beside the chair, examined the woman's hands, cold, but no trace, and then glanced slowly around the room. On the mantel was a photograph. She had faced down a teacup, still on the table, still half full. There was a faint trace of perfume in the air. Familiar clawing on the floor, tucked beneath the woman's feet, was a sheet of paper folded. Once no envelope. Flint opened it with care to words scrolled in a hurried, angular hand. Tell Jane word reached Miss Marple just before 3 o'clock. She had been darning acid in the parlor when Mrs. Simmons, the baker's niece, came knocking in. Marple, she said breathlessly, they say they found a body. Fairweather, a woman's body. She's dead, they say. Been there since morning or longer, and the inspector from Broadhurst is there now. Miss Marple set aside her needle. Did they say who it was? No name, not yet, but she was wearing gird. Miss Marple paused for only a second. Would you be so kind as to fetch my chaudière? The gray one by the stair. 10 minutes later, she stood by the green gate of Fairweather Cottage. She didn't go in. She didn't need to, she observed. The garden had been cleared recently. The rosemary trimmed the paths, wept the old flower beds, turned over. Someone had intended to stay. But there was no luggage, no washing on the line, no boots by the door. As she turned to leave, something caught her eye in the ivy, a faint glimmer, a shard of glass. She bent slowly, her knees complaining, and picked it up. It was a fragment of a broken teacup bone, china white, with a painted edge of blue forget-me-nots, not just a cute Millie Toller's favorite cup. Miss Marple had seen it before, years ago, when she had visited the Toller house for a jumble sale fundraiser. Emily had refused to let anyone else use it, said it was from her grandmother. Miss Marple held the shard in her hand for a long moment, then tucked it into her pocket. That evening, the village went into hush mode. The fog persisted, rolling thick and low across the hedge. No one walked. Lone lights stayed on longer than usual. Children were told to stay inside. At the vicarage, voices were raised over supper. Can't be, Emily insisted. Reverend Ellington, not after all this time. Why would she come back? Why would she leave in the first place? His wife counted. And if it wasn't there, then why her name on the glass? You saw it yourself. Well, whoever she was, Simeon wanted us to see her. That curtain wasn't closed by accident. Miss Marple sipped her tea. She had declined supper, saying she wasn't feeling quite herself, though the truth was far simpler. She needed silence. Too, she needed to think. Someone had returned to Fairweather Cottage, someone who knew Wade's quiet charm, its half-forgotten stillness. Naomi, who wanted privacy, but left clues, the name, the teeth, a note to tell Jane, not tell the police, not tell father, not even tell the vicar. Tell Jane. Who would say such a thing? Only someone who knew her, someone who trusted her, someone who believed, even with their last breath, that Miss Marple would understand. And she did, or at least she would. She rose and pulled the curtain tight across her window. Outside, the fog had thickened again. The lamplight matted soft halos on the road. In the distance, a dog barked once and fell silent and in Fairweather Cottage. The red curtain in the kitchen still hung crooked, like a drawer left open just enough to whisper a secret through chapter 3. The teacup without etched. The teacup wasn't broken. That was the detail that struck Miss Marple muscularly. The next morning, even more than the body in the chair or the stranger note addressed only to her, because the last time she had seen that teacup, the white one with the painted blue forget-me-nots, it had been chipped, a small crack just beneath the handle, no bigger than the point of a pencil. Millie Toller had shown it to her once with an embarrassed little smile. It was me grandmother's. She'd said it's silly, but I still use it. I never mend the floor. Yet, the cub constable, Hugh Trainer, had shown her that morning, held delicately, keen-gloved hands, as he invited her into the back parlor of the station, had no crack, no chip, no floor, not even a scratch. It was still half full when we found it. He said no fingerprints, No fingerprints, no ever used it. Wiped it clean. And you're sure it's hers? Shisked, her voice calm, but her eyes sharp. Well, Mrs. Croft from the flower stall said. Emily always used that pattern, and Mr. Traynor, her old neighbor, confirmed it looked familiar. He said she brought it to the church picnic every year. Hugh paused. You knew her, didn't you, Miss? Marple smiled faintly in a way that mattered. Yes, Emily was a good girl, quite observant, the kind of person who notices things other people miss. A trait I find rather useful personally. Hugh hesitated. Do you think it's really her? The woman in the chair, she wore red, didn't she? He nodded. Then yes, I think it's very likely, though I'd be curious to know what the coroner has to say. He opened a folder and passed it across the desk. Preliminary findings. No sign of physical trauma. No wounds, no strangulation. But something odd, the doctor said. Her system had traces of something herbal. Not poison, not exactly something that slowed her heart. Miss Marple read the sheet. Slow, light handwriting was precise and small, but the message within it sent a shiver through her. Valiant, possibly wild poppy, not fatal in most doses unless combined. Was it suicide? Hugh asked quietly. Miss Marple looked up. That depends. Did she come to Fairweather Cottage alone? As far as we know, but well, there are footprints in the back garden. 2 sets too, she repeated. One small, probably hers. The other, well, they were deeper, heavier, slightly larger. Male, most likely, could be a delivery man, I suppose. But Hugh hesitated. Worth checking, but hardest thing is the curtain, miss. Marple folded her hands in her lap. High's the curtain that didn't close. He nodded. It wasn't sewn wrong. It had been sliced. Someone cut the cord on the right side just enough to stop it from pulling Gale the way across Dipperate. That's what the inspector thinks. Someone wanted used to see inside, but not too clearly. She gave a soft sigh. Andros, well, I'm afraid this is no longer simply a question of who. It's a question of why. By mid-morning, the village was practically humming with speculation. The sun had broken through the fog, turning the frost to glistening puddles, and with every slosh of melting ice came a fresh rumor. Mrs. Oliphant at the dress shop swore she'd seen a man in a gray overcoat lurking outside Fairweather Cottage 2 nights ago. The grocer's boy said someone had ordered rosehip tea from the chemist 2 weeks early, and with the initials E.T. And the vicar, normally the voice of calm in all things, had reportedly told his wife that if he had received a note saying "Tell Jane," he would have gone straight to the police. But Miss Marple had not gone to the police. She had gone to the library. Small, musty room attached to Village Hall, open only on Tuesdays and Fridays, and run by Mrs. Cora Boot, a former Latin teacher, with a fondness for true crime paperbacks. The shelves leaned inward slightly, and the fireplace had long since given up its duty. But Miss Marple found the air inside useful, not just for the books, but for the conversations. I remember Emily, said Mrs. Boot, as she dusted off a shelf. Off gardening guides came in every other Friday, took out all sorts, poetry, nature, books, and dance. Rather interestingly, a volume on Victorian funeral customs. Miss Marple raised an eyebrow. Did she ever mention why I didn't say she just checked it out, read it cover to cover, and returned it exactly on time? No late fees, quite unlike the younger generation. If you ask me, do you happen to keep records? Merce spit-pined. Naturally, paper cards, alphabetical. No one's ever asked for them before they found it in the middle drawer under T. Ford told her, Emily, a dozen cards, each listing a borrowed book, the date, and a return checkmark. But it waits final card that stopped them both. The last book Emily ever borrowed, The Long Watch of Flowers and Their Hidden Messages, checked out 11 months, accordant. A week later, an odd choice, Miss Marple murmured. Was Emily particular in terse in flowers? Not that I knew of, said Mrs. Boot, though She did win first place at the flower show. 2 years back, her roses, I think Miss Marple said nothing. Her eyes lingered on the title again, The Language of Flowers. In the old Victorian symbolism, flower meant something. A rose might mean love, a daisy innocence, forget, not meant remembrance. And rosemary meant remembrance of the dead. Miss Marple thought again of the herbs she'd smelled in the garden, trimmed fresh, not wild planted perhaps, to be noticed back home. She placed a teacup fragment from her coat pocket on the kitchen table. She stared at it as she brewed herself a pot of tea. Not Valerian, thank you, and opened her little leather-bound notebook. She wrote 3 names: Emily Teller, red cardigan. Tell Jane, then beneath it, in slightly smaller handwriting cup, not chipped, rosemary. In garden, second set of footprints. Chet tapped the pen gently against her chin. Someone had gone to a great deal. Up trouble, not just to arrange the death, but to stage it, to leave hints, to draw her in. And what sort of person would do that? Not a stranger. Not someone who feared her, someone who trusted her to understand what others wouldn't, someone who knew. Miss Marple didn't believe in accidents. She closed the notebook. The village clock struck 4. Outside, the melting frost left the earth darkened, damp, but beneath that softness, she knew, were footprints, marks, waiting to be found, stories. It's written, not in ink, but in moss and mud, in whispering hedgerows, and she would read them chapter for the visitor who knocked at dusk. The knock came just after 5, as twilight curled its fingers around the village, and the lamplighter made his slow rounds along Maple Lane. Miss Marple had been reshelving her cookery books. She'd never liked the way The Art of Potato Puddings, Linda Gaines, Household Cures for Influenza, when she heard the firm, hesitant rap at her door. Not the knock of a neighbor, nor the hurried, familiar pattern of the vicar's wife. This knock had weight. When she opened the door, she found a man standing on her front step, his face partially obscured by a felt hat pulled low over his brow. He was tall, lying mid-50s. Perhaps his coat was tweed, expensive, but weather-worn, and he carried a walking stick, not out of need, but as if it had once belonged to someone else. Miss Jane Marple, he asked. His accent was polished, the sort that had once sat in drawing rooms and read the Times by morning light. I am, she said pleasantly, stepping aside. And you are? He removed his hat as he crossed the threshold. His hair was silver at the temples, his skin deeply lined, but high size was sharp, a stormy blue. My name is Leonard Gibbons. I believe you knew me on Miss Marple blinked once. Mr. Thomas Gibbons, of Fairweather Cottage. Leonard nodded. I inherited it when he passed, though I rarely visited. It's been under a letting agent's care since the will was finalized. I had business in Bristol this week and decided to check on the place myself. Imagine my surprise when I arrived to find police tape and a constable who looked barely old enough to shave. Miss Marple led him into Thapolor. Would you care for tea? Mr. Gibbons, he hesitated. Yes, please, she moved efficiently, her fingers knowing every spoon, every drawer. It gave her time to study him without seeming to do so. She eyes didn't wander. He stood still. Too still. She returned with 2 cups and a short plate of ginger biscuits. I'll come straight to the point, he said, accepting his tea without sugar. The young woman who died in the cottage. They haven't confirmed her identity publicly, but it was told she may have been Emily Toller. Yes, Miss Marple said softly. That's what the believe. He took a slow sip, then placed his cup on the saucer with care. Eek knew Emily years ago, briefly. Miss Marple didn't reply, but Ursuline's was permission to continue. Met at my uncle's house, actually at summer. I had come down from London. He wasn't well, and I was arranging some affairs. Emily delivered vegetables once a week. Her father was the gardener for half the village. He glanced up. She was very quiet, but perceptive. We spoke often. You admired her, Miss Marple said, not unkindly. His mouth tightened slightly. I admired her honesty and her ability to say nothing at all. Most people fill silence with noise. Emily did not. There was a long pause. I offered to take her to London, he said. Finally, not to marry, not at first, he thought. Well, I imagined she'd see the museums, learn something. Rochette declined politely, then disappeared to Miss Marple's teacup. Never left her hands. You were disappointed. I was humiliated, he said with sudden honesty, and I never told anyone. She nodded slowly, but someone found out. He looked up sharply. What do you mean? She reached into the drawer beside her armchair and removed the notebook. She flipped it open to a blank page and showed him the note she had copied from memory. Tell Jane. His face twitched just slightly. I didn't send that, I swear. I believe you, but you knew something. Something no one else knew. You knew Emily Toller was the kind of woman who would leave a place if she felt something was not right or not safe. He didn't reply. Mr. Gibbons, did you visit the cottage this week before the police arrived? No. Did anyone know Yahoo'd returned to Ellsworth? Only the letting agent and I paid in cash. Miss Marple's fingers traced the edge of the notebook slowly. Then someone knew you'd come back. Someone meant for you to see what had happened, or for me to see. Looked troubled now, no longer composed. I don't know what you think I did. I don't think you did anything. I think you came back to face a ghost. Only someone else was already there. He rose abruptly. I shouldn't have come, she stewed. No, Mr. Gibbons, I'm very glad you did. He hesitated. You believe she was murdered? I believed someone set a stage, Miss Marple said gently. And when people go to such lengths to create a scene, it's because they want an audience and a message. Ha! He stepped back toward the door. What message? She smiled sadly. That Ellsworth never forgets, and that even the quietest woman can leave behind a storm. After he left, Miss Marple returned to her seat. The room seemed colder now. The fire burned steadily. She pulled her shawl close and appended her notebook again. She added a new line. Leonard Gibbons' unfinished story. Outside dusk had deepened. The lamplight flickered gold against the fog. Somewhere in the distance, a bell told the hour 6, maybe 7, and in the memory of that unfinished cup of tea, she thought again of the chipped teacup from long ago. Now perfect, flawless, suspiciously whole. Somewhere, someone had gone to the trouble of replacing it, covering a crack with silence, and that Jane Marple knew better than anyone was never where a story ended. It was always where it began. Chapter 5. The letter in the hearth, ashes, the chill. In the morning air was Harper, now carrying a scent of smoke and damp earth that clung to the village like a secret. Miss Marple sat quietly by her fire, watching the last embers glowfully in the hearth. She had spent the night turning over Leonard Gibbons' visit in her mind, and the steady rhythm of the fire's dying flicker seemed to Tomir the slow unfolding of the mystery. That morning, as she prepared a pot after, the postman arrived with a single letter, unusual in its plainness and lacaf stamp. It was addressed simply, Miss Jane Marple, Maple, Ellsworth. Her fingers hesitated briefly before breaking the wax-sealed deep red, unmarked but carefully pressed inside. It's a folded note, yellowed, etched, written in a careful, deliberate hand. Dear Jane, there are truths hidden beneath the frost, truths that even the cold cannot bury forever. Look where the earth once held its warmth. Miss Marple's breath caught. The letter was unsigned, except for the initial E. She read it again, slowly, savoring the familiar cadence of words meant to guide, not alarm. Beneath the frost, beneath the earth, her eyes flicked to the fireplace behind her. The ashes from last night's fire lay cold but untouched, a pale mound beneath the iron grate. With practiced care, she fetched a small shovel and a metal tray from the kitchen. Moving quietly, she knelt by the hearth. and began to sift through the ashes, mindful not to disturb the bricks beneath her fingers brushed. Canes, something hard, a folded scrap of paper, charred around the edges, viewed intact. She unfolded it gently. Dish words were faint but legible. Look beyond the glass, the names, only the beginning, Miss Marple frowned. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but there was something urgent in the tone. A plea, perhaps. She replaced the paper in her pocket and rose, her mind already rushing. Give the name. Emily carved in frost was only the beginning. Then what was thereist outside a raven chord? A harsh, sudden sound that echoed against the gray skies. The village, still shrouded in the early morning mist, seemed to hold its breath. Later that day, Miss Marple visited the local florist, Emily Croft's shop, bright and fragrant. Despite the season, Emily herself was behind the counter, arranging sprigs of rosemary and sprigs of thyme with delicate care. She looked up with a warm smile, though her eyes carried a shadow of worry. Miss Marple, she greeted. I heard about the tragedy. It's terrible. Yes, it is, Miss Marple agreed softly. I wondered if you might help me with something. Emily did. Of course. Miss Marple held out the fragment of the teacup. Do you recognize this pattern? Emily examined it closely. Yes, it's a classic. My grandmother had a set like that, though. I thought that particular cup was chipped. Was Miss Marple confirmed, but the one found at the cottage was whole, no chip. Emily's fingers tightened around the cup she held. Emily Tola was very particular about her belongings. She never liked imperfections, yet she kept that cup. It was important to her. Do you know why? Miss Marple escapingly. Emily shook her head. No, but I do know. She was fascinated by symbols and meaning. She believed that objects could carry memories, almost like people. Miss Marple smiled faintly, a wise thought. As they spoke, a customer entered, a man with a rumpled coat and an anxious glance. He approached Emily with hesitation. Mrs. Croft, he asked. I'm looking for information about Emily Toller. Emily glanced at Miss Marple, then back to the man. This is my shop, Mr. Harold Merriman. I was her schoolmate. Well, that's touched, but I heard about her situation. Miss Marple noted the flicker of nervousness in his eyes. Perhaps you'd care to join us. She shivered as the afternoon light faded. 3 stories began to intertwine, each a thread in the growing tapestry of secrets surrounding this fair-weather cottage. Miss Marple sipped her tea and listened closely. The name carved in frost was not just a mark, it was a summons, and the mystery beneath the glass was only just beginning to. Chapter 6. Whispers behind closed doors. The village of Elmsworth was no stranger to whispers. It was said that secrets traveled faster there in the morning. Trained from Broadhurst and Thadehaven, the oldest walls had ears, but in the wake of Emily's tallest death, those whispers gathered weight, thickening the air with suspicion. And Denise Miss Marple had learned long ago that the quietest voices often carry the loudest truths. So when the clock chimed 10, she set off toward Divicorage, where the Lenningtons often hosted informal gatherings. Place where the village spells beat loudest. The vicar's wife, Margaret, greeted her warmly, though her hands trembled slightly as she poured. TJ, it's terrible. All of these people are frightened, and talk is growing darker. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. Fright breeds silence. In some noise, and others, both can hide the truth. Margaret sighed. Do you think Kimley's death will change Elmsworth? Change is already underway, Jane replied softly. Some doors will open, others will close forever. As they spoke, the vicar himself entered, carrying a small bundle of letters. Archie, you're here. I wanted to share something with you. His voice was measured, but carried an unmistakable urgency. He handed her a thin envelope, peeled but unmarked inside a single folded sheet. For a hastily scrawled note. Meet me at the old mill by sunset. There are things you must know. E.T. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. This must have been written before Shetty Sappard. The vicar frowned, and yet it suggests someone wanted to reach out to reveal something hidden or to warn, Miss Marple murmured. Margaret leaned forward. The old mill has been abandoned for years, some say. It's haunted. Jane smiled gently. Haunted by Marys. Perhaps not spirits. Later that afternoon, Miss Marple made her way through the narrow lanes toward the mill. The sun hung low, casting long shadows over the rusted gears and broken timbers. The air was thick, with the scent of damp wood and forgotten times. She paused at the entrance, her breath visible in the cooling air. The old door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing a cavernous interior scattered with debris and dust motes dancing in thuppening light. Inside, a figure awaited a man whose face was partially hidden beneath a woolen cap. You came, he said softly. I did, and Miss Marple replied. He stepped forward, revealing a worn leather satchel and a wary expression. My name is Thomas Hardy. I knew Emily. We shared secret since. Jane studied him carefully. Then, perhaps, you can help me understand. He nodded. Emily was frightened, not of death, but of being forgotten. She found something in the village. Something old dangerous. What was it? A diary, he said, pulling a small, leather-bound book from his bag. Belonged to Thomas Gibbons. Miss Marple's heart quickened. This very man whose cottage had become the center of this mystery. The diary mentioned secrets buried beneath Elmsworth's old family disputes. Betrayal debts, unpaid, Emily believed. It held answers. Jane took the diary, gently penning it to reveal delicate, spidery handwriting as she read. The first lines, whispers behind closed doors, seemed to gather around her, waiting to be. Hard at last, chapter 7, secrets in the shadows. Diary's leather cover was once soft to the touch, like the pages, within yellowed with age, yet surprisingly well preserved. Miss Marple carefully turned so. The first entry dated some 50 years earlier. Elmsworth holds more than memory. It carries grudges as deep as roots of the ancient oaks. She read on the words, drawing a picture of old alliances, shattered and promises. Broken names she recognized: Gibbons, Toller, Marmon, familiar center, tent by marriage rivalry and debts owed in silence. It speaks of a betrayal. Thomas Hardy explained quietly, a betrayal that changed everything. Camps. Marple glanced up, and Emily thought this diary held the key to her fate. Key nodded. She believed that whoever understood the past could unlock the present. Outside, the shadows lengthened, pooling like ink across the village square. The murmur of voices grew distant, swallowed by the gathering. Kosk. Jane closed the diary gently. This is more than a simple murder. It's a story of lives tangled over generations. Thomas sighed. Emily tried to warn people through notes, through whispers, but the village is tight-lipped, and some secrets, it seems, are better left buried. Miss Marple's eyes met his steadily. Or perhaps they simply wait for the right time to surface. She thanked him and left the mill with the diary tucked securely under her arm. The air had cooled further in. The path back was illuminated only by the faint glow of street lamps and distant stars. As she walked, her mind percentage of the fragments, footprints in the garden, the unclosed curtain, the no-tell Jane, the diary itself, each a thread in a tapestry more intricate than she had imagined back in her cottage. She spread the diary open on her desk and began to read more closely. The entries detailed disputes over land, contested wills, and whisper athletes. But there was one passage that stood out, a reference to a hidden compartment in Fairweather Cottage, where Thomas Gibbons was said to have concealed documents vital to the village's history. Miss Marple's fingers traced the faded words, see beneath. The hearthstone where warmth once dwelled, the past lies buried in ash. In shadow, her eyes flicked to the hearth. Fairy ashes she had sifted days, for suddenly the house felt colder as if the walls themselves were watching. She made her way to the fireplace, kneeling once more to examine the ashes closely. Through just beneath the soot and cinders was a loose stone almasting perstable beneath her fingers, with gentle but firm pressures pried it loose beneath. It lay a small metal box, tarnished by time, heart quickening. She opened the box to reveal a bundle of yellowed papers tied with a faded blue ribbon. The secrets of Elmsworth, long hidden in shadows, were now in her hands. Chapter 8. The Web Tightens. The small metal box felt surprisingly heavy in Miss Marple's hands. Its weight seeming to carry the burden of decades. She untied the faded blue ribbon, careful ribbling, a bundle of documents, old letters, legal papers, in what appeared to be a faded map of the village and surrounding lands. As she sifted through the papers, her eyes caught a series of letters addressed to Thomas Gibbons from an unknown correspondent, signed only with initials E.T. One letter, dated just months before Emily told us as Parbaran, was marked urgent. It spoke cryptically of unsettled debts, familiar shame, and a secret that must not see daylight. Miss Marple's heart pounded. The initials matched the signature on the note she had received. The plea to tell Jane Emily Toller had been trying to expose something, a truth someone wanted to keep hidden at all costs. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock on the door. Miss Marple quickly folded the papers and slipped them into her desk drawer before its worn. It was Constable Hugh Traynor, his face etched with concerness. "Marple, there's been a development," he said. "Inspector Flint wants to speak with you at the station." She nodded, tucking her shawl around her shoulders. "Lead the way, Constable." At the station, the atmosphere was tense. Inspector Flint greeted her, gravely motioning toward a private room where Leonard Gibbons, Wazel reading, seated. "Thank you both for coming," Flint said, his eyes flicking between them. "We've discovered something troubling." He placed a photograph on the table, a recently taken image of Fairweather Cottage's garden, but with something new: a set of footprints leading away from the back door into the Nerby woods. "These prints are fresh," Flint explained, "and we believe they belong to a man named Harold Marmon." Miss Marple's mind raced. Harold Marmon, the man from the florist shop earlier that week, Flint continued. "We've located Merriman. He claims he was visiting the cottage to return a borrowed book, but his story has inconsistencies." Leonard Gibbons frowned. "Don't trust him, Miss." Marple was silent for a moment, then spoke softly in Elmsworth. "Everyone wears masks, Inspector, but the truth always slips through the cracks." Flint nodded. "We intend to bring Marmon in for questioning. Meanwhile, Miss Marple, I hope you'll continue to assist us." Saz left the station. The weight of the hidden papers in her drawer reminded her that the village's past and present were more entwined than ever. The web of secrets was tightening one thread at a time. Chapter 9. The questioning begins. Air inside the interrogation room was thick with tension and the faint scent of stale coffee. Harold Marmon sat across from Inspector Flint, his fingers nervously twisting a handkerchief. Miss Marple observed quietly from the adjoining room, listening intently to their exchange through the thin glass. "Mr. Marmon," Flint began, his voice measured but firm, "you say you visited Fairweather Cottage to return a borrowed book." "That's right, Sir," Marmon replied, eyes darting between Flint and the recorder on the table. "Emily had lent me a volume on local history. I want to talk of it back." Flint leaned forward. "When did you last see Emily Toller?" Merriman swallowed. "It's been some time, years really. We were schoolmates, but we drifted apart, Miss." Marple noted the slight tremor in his voice. "Years," she mused, "certainly not since the disappearance." Flint pressed on. "What were you doing in Elmsworth?" "Recently, just visiting an old friend," Marmon said quickly. "Had no reason to come near Fairweather Cottage." The inspector's eyes narrowed. "We have footprints leading from the back door, fresh prints matching your shoes. Care to explain?" Tierman's face palled. "I don't know how that's possible. I swear I didn't go near the back." Miss Marple caught a flicker of desperation, but also a glimmer of truth. If Marma lied, it wasn't well rehearsed later. A Flint emerged Heist's expression. "Unreadable, Miss Marple. Your instincts have been invaluable," he said quietly. "We need your insight on this tangled web." Back at her cottage, Jane pondered Marmon's conflicting statements. Why deny being near the back when the prince said otherwise? Is it guilt, fear, or something more? Her thoughts returned to the Darien, the hidden papers. Emily had uncovered truths that shook the village's foundations. Truths worth killing, for she picked up the folded letter from the hearth. She read in the plea, "Look beyond the glass. The name is only the beginning." Miss Marple felt the weight of those words. The real story was just beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered, and she was ready. Chapter 10. A Visitor's Secret. The following afternoon, as the winter sun cast long shadows over Elmsworth, a visitor arrived at Miss Marple's door. This time, it was not a friend, nor a villager, but a stranger, a woman wrapped in heavy coat, her eyes sharp and searching beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "Miss Marple?" she asked, her voice low but urgent. "Yes, I am," Jane replied, stepping aside to welcome her, and the woman hesitated before entering. "My name is Elalina Tala. I'm Emily's cousin." Jane's heart quickened. Another link, Tuth Tala's. Perhaps the missing piece. Elalina removed her hat, revealing a pale face, framed by dark hair stirred with gray. There was a determined set to her jaw, but also a weariness that spoke of long years. "Burdened by secrets, I've come because I believe Emily's death was no accident," Elalina said softly. "She confided in me before she disappeared. There were things she feared about the family, about the village." Miss Marple gestured toward the sitting room. "Please sit. Tell me everything you know," over steaming cups of tea. Elalina unfolded the story, whispers of an old family feud, lost inheritances, and a secret pact made decades ago. Emily had discovered documents suggesting someone had been manipulating the village's affairs for personal gain, threatening to expose those involved. She was scared, Elalina said, her voice trembling, and she wanted to protect those she loved, but also bring justice. Jane listened carefully, her mind weaving these new threads into the growing tapestry of the mystery. As evening fell, Elena glanced towards window, a shadow crossing her face. "There's one more thing before Emily vanished," she mentioned. "A visitor, someone unexpected, someone who came knocking late at night." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "Do y'all know who it was?" Elalina shook her head. "No, but I believe they hold the Keith clock," chimed softly in the quiet room, marking the passage of time and the deepening of secrets. Miss Marple knew that with each new visitor, the web of truth grew tighter, and the final pieces were drawing near. Chapter 11. Midnight Revelation. The village of Ellsworth had settled into Afrogeli calm, but Miss Marple knew better than to trust the quiet. Often, it was in the stillness that the loudest truths reveled themselves. That night, long after the village lamps had been extinguished, Jane sat by her window, a shawl draped over her shoulders, eyes tracing the shadowed outlines of the trees. The letter from Emily, the note tucked beneath the heart Haitius, and Elalina. Tala's words all danced together in her mind like ghostly whispers. A sudden knock shattered the silence. It was a sharp, deliberate technoing. Miss Marple opened the door cautiously to find a figure cloaked in darkness, the faint outline of a man's face barely visible beneath a hat pulled low. "Miss Marple," the visitor whispered, voice tinged with urgency. "I have something you must see, something that changes everything." Without waiting for an invitation, he stepped inside and handed a small, leather-bound notebook. His hands trembled slightly as he spoke. "My name is Edward Marmon." He said, Harold's brother. I've been away 4 years, but I couldn't stay silent any longer. Miss Marple motioned to the armchair. Please, tell me. Edward's eyes flickered with fear. Emily found out about something about our family, about debts and lies. She was going to expose it that night at Fairweather Cottage. I came to warn her, but I was too late. He had pawned the notebook and revealed pages filled with hastily written notes. Names, dates, and cryptic references. Someone wanted to silence her, Edward said, voice breaking. And now, I fear I'm next, Miss Marple listened intently, the pieces falling into place like the final notes of a haunting melody outside the wind-whisper retro. The trees carrying with it the weight of long-buried secrets and Danside. Miss Marple prepared for the reckoning that was to come. Chapter 12. The Gathering. Stormed village of Elmsworth awoke beneath the slate gray sky, the promise of rain heaving in the air. But inside Miss Marple's cozy sitting room, the atmosphere was charged with a different kind of storm, one of anticipation and unspoken fear. Edward Marmon's revelation the night before had rippled through Hermond like a sudden gust through autumn leaves. His notebook, with its tangled web of names, dates, and half-formed confessions, suggested that the mystery was far deeper and darker than anyone had guessed. Miss Marple set the notebook carefully on the table, her fingers tracing the edges of the pages as she pondered the next step. There was no turning back now. The pieces were in motion, and soon the village's carefully maintained facade would crack. By mid-morning, she found herself walking purposefully toward the village hall, where a meeting had been hastily arranged by Inspector Flint. The townspeople gathered quietly, faces pale, eyes wary, aware that the events unfolding had touched every corner of their lives. Flint took the floor, his voice steady but grave. We have reason to believe that Emily Tallis' death was the result of a deliberate act. To conceal long-standing secrets within this community, it is imperative that we command her. Share what we know and seek justice. Murmurings rose from the crowd, a mixture of fear and resolve. Miss Marple listened closely as villagers began to speak, some offering hesitant memories, others reluctant confess the old wounds between families. The whispered rivalries and deep-rooted grievances surfaced like ghosts long kept at bay. Leonard Gibbons spoke quietly of his family's role in the village's history, Ilalana of the weight of legacy, and Edward Marmon of the debts that had shaped lives and destinies. Amidst the gathering storm of voices, Miss Marple's calm presence was a beacon as the meeting drew to a clay's rose and addressed the assembly. Truth is like the frost. It may obscure it, may chill, but when the sun rises, it reveals everything. The rain began softly outside, a gentle patter on the windows washing away the dust of old secrets, and in that cleansing light, Elmsworth braced itself for their reckoning to come. Chapter 13. Shadows in the Rain. Rain fell steadily over Elmsworth, washing the village streets and cloaking world in a misty veil. The steady drumming on rooftops and the rhythmic tapping against window panes seemed to echo the unsettled thoughts that had gripped the communitizens. The meeting at the village hall. Miss Marple stood by her window, watching as villagers hurried past under umbrellas, faces drawn and guarded. The storm outside seemed to mirror the tempest brewing beneath the surface of the quiet village. That afternoon, a call came from Inspector Flint. A discovery had been made at Fairweather Cottage, something that could unravel even more of the mystery. Miss Marple arrived at the cottage just as Flint and Constable Trainer were examining the garden. The rain had turned the earth to mud, and footprints crisscrossed the soft ground. Flint pointed to a small, partially buried object near the back porch. We found this just beneath the surface. Miss Marple bent down and picked up a delicate silver locket, tarnished by time, but still gleaming faintly in the gray light. She opened it, carefully revealing two tiny portraits, one of a young woman with familiar pale hair, and the other of a man whose features were worn but unmistakably locked. She whispered. Flint nodded grimly. It's a piece of the pasta someone tried to hide. Okay. As the rain continued to fall, Miss Marple's thoughts turned inward, piecing together the tangled threads of family, loyalty, and betrayal. The shadows in the rain were growing longer, and the truth, though shrouded, was beginning to take shape. The morning after the rain, Elmsworth was washed clean, but restless. Dampness hung in the air, and the village seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what might come. Next, Miss Marple arrived at the village hallowly, drawn by a note from Inspector Flint, requesting her presence. Inside, the usual chatter was replaced by a tense silence. Compliment broken on Libby, the soft footsteps of Constable Trainer. Flint greeted her with a grave expression. We've had a breakthrough, Jane. He led her to a side room where a young woman sat pale and nervous. Her hands trembled as she clasped a worn shawl tightly around her shoulders. This is Alice Turner. Flint trotted. She's come forward with information about that night at Farweather Cottage. Alice looked up, her eyes wide. I didn't want to speak before I was scared, but I can't keep silent no more. Miss Marple nodded gently. Sometimes the smallest voice carries the greatest truth. Alice took a shaky breath. I was walking home Lateef that night when I saw someone near the cottage. A man he was arguing with. Millie couldn't hear what they said, but it was fierce. Then he left in a hurry. Did you recognize him? Miss Marple asked. Alice hesitated. No, but he dropped something, a handkerchief with the initials L.G. Leonard Gibbons. Miss Marple chanced a glance with Flint. The web of secrets had drawn another thread. Titus. Alice's words settled over the room. Miss Marple felt the invisible eyes of the village upon them all, watching, waiting. The unseen witness had spoken. The shadows that once hid in silence were now illuminated. Chapter 15. Confrontations and Confessions. The afternoon sun struggled through a patchy sky as Elmsworth braced itself for what many sensed would be a reckoning. News of Alice Turner's testimony had spread quickly, and whispers of Leonard Gibbons's involvement stirred beneath the village's polite surface. Miss Marple arrived at Fairweather Cottage shortly before Inspector Flint. Leonard Gibbons and Constable Trainer convened in the parlor. Atmosphere was taut, filled with unspoken questions and the weight of long-held secrets. Flint opened the meeting, his gaze steady. Mr. Gibbons, Miss Turner has come forward with information plus you at Farweather Cottage. The night Emily Toller died. Cared to explain. Leon's face paused, his composure wavering for the first time. I admit I was there, but I came to warn Emily, not harm her. Miss Marple leaned forward. What was this warning? Leonard, he hesitated, then spoke in a loud voice. There were threats, old family grievances surfing. Emily believed someone was trying to silence her because she had found evidence that could ruin reputations. Flint interjected. In the argument, a last witness. Leonard swallowed hard. It was heated, yes, but it ended before I left. I had no intention of harm. Miss Marple stood at his eyes, seeing both guilt and truth mingled. Then, who do you believe is responsible? Leonard's voice dropped. I fear it is someone close, someone who would go to any lengths to protect their secrets. As the room fell silent, the tension thickened. The tangled web of betrayal, loyalty, and deception tightened around them all. Miss Marple knew that the path to truth was seldom straight, and sometimes confessions only open new doors. Chapter 16. Echoes from the past. The errand. Elmsworth carried a faint chill, a reminder that winter was edging closer. The events surrounding Emily Tyler's death had unsettled the village's very foundation, and now, more than ever, that set seemed to reach out like a shadow, stretching across the present. Miss Marple sat in her parlor, poring over the diary of Thomas Gibbons one summer. The entries revealed secrets not only of family disputes, but also of village scandals long buried. Beneath years of politinio, among the faded pages, she discovered a passage referencing long-forgotten fire that had ravaged the section of Elmsworth. Decades ago, a fire suspected by some to be no accident. As she read, a sudden knock startled her. It was Elalina Toller, her face pale but determined. "I found something," Elanina said breathlessly, holding an old bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. Miss Marple invited her in together. They examined the letters, correspondence between Thomas Gibbons and a mysterious figure who warned of impending ruin. If certain truths were revealed, these letters mention names we've heard. Elalina whispered in names of those who might have motives still alive today. Surpassed. Miss Marple realizes, not dead. It was a living, breathing force, echoing through the present with power enough to kill as the shadows lengthened outside. Elmsworth's darkest secrets began to unravel, and the true story behind the name carved in frosted glass edged closer to the light. Chapter 17. The gathering Truth Village Hall was once again filled, the air thick with anticipation. Word of the new letters found by Elalina stirred the townsfolk, drawing both curiosity and unease as familiar faces settled into their seats. Miss Marple took her place quietly at the back, her keen eyes observing every expression. Inspector Flint stepped forward holding aged correspondence. These letters confirm suspicions that the roots of recent tragedies run far deeper than we imagined. They reveal alliances, betrayals, sand threads that stretch across generations. Leonard Gibbons spoke next, us, voice steady but burdened. "I had no idea such secrets lingered in these shadows. It explains much about why Emily feared for her life." Miss Marple rose, her voice calm but resolute. "Truths long hidden will not stay buried forever. It is only when we face them together that we can find justice and peace." As the villagers exchanged glances, a tentative understanding began to form. The mystery of Emily Toller was no longer a solitary puzzle, but a collective reckoning. Outside, the late afternoon sun peers through the clouds, casting a hopeful light over Elmsworth. The gathering truth was just beginning. Chapter 18, the final piece. The air in Elmsworth was crisp, the kind of autumn chill that sharpens the senses and clears the mind after weeks of unfolding mysteries, hidden letters, and whispered confessions. Miss Marple felt the threads of the puzzle tightening toward their inevitable conclusions. Sat in her favorite chair, the diary of Thomas Gibbons open on her lap. Bezadeth's collection of letters and notes gathered from the villages. The rain had finally ceased, leaving the village washed and bright under a pale sun. That morning she had requested a meeting with Leonard Gibbons, Elalina Toller, Inspector Flint, and Constable Trainer. The purpose was clear: to piece together the final clues and come from truth. As they gathered in her sitting room, Miss Marple addressed them quietly but firmly. "Emily Toller's death was no accident. It was a carefully orchestrated act to hide secrets long buried, but never forgotten." She laid out the evidence: the carved name in the frost unclosed curtains, the teacup without a chip, the footprints, the diary, and to the Taurus, revealing old disputes and threats. Each piece pointed to one truth. Samine in Elmsworth had feared exposure and gone to great lengths. Tosling's Emily Leonard Gibbons swallowed hard. "I had hoped it wasn't true, but I see now it must be." Elalina nodded solemnly. "Our families have been intertwined with both love and conflict for generations." Inspector Flint cleared his throat. "We have enough to act, but it will require courage from every one of us." Marple's eyes met theirs, all in turn, in honesty, for only with honest ticking the shadows be lifted outside. The village clock chiming noon. The final piece was falling into place. Elmsworth was ready for the truth to be told. Chapter 19, Justice in the Frost. Frost had returned to Elmsworth, casting a pale, crystalline sheen over the village, just as it had the morning Emily Toller's name appeared on that window. But this time the frost felt different, less like a silent witness, and more like a solemn veil over the chapter closing in the village's long-held secret. Miss Marple stood quietly outside Fairweather Cottage, now cordoned off by Polly's tape, the soft crunch of frost underfoot accompanying the sharp morning air inside. Flint and Constable Traynor prepared the final reports, and Leonard Gibbons and Lenina Tola exchanged somber glances. The investigation had revealed truth. The murderer was someone who had felt cornered by years of family grudges and the threat of exposure. Confronted with the weight of their actions, the culprit had confessed a confession that rippled through the village, shocking yet strangely relieving justice. It seemed was not only about punishment, but about truth brought to light. Forgiveness sought and healing began. Miss Marple watched the scene unfold, her heart heavy yet hopeful. The name, carved in frosted glass, was no longer a symbol of fear, but a reminder that even in the coldest winter's warmth could return. As the village breathed a collective sigh, Miss Marple knew that while mysteries might fade, the spirit of Elmsworth endured, resilient and wise. Chapter 20. A village transformed. Winter had settled fully over Ellsworth, wrapping the village in a quiet blanket of snow. The streets, unsilver with whispered suspicions and furtive glances, now seemed peaceful, as if the weight of the past had finally been lifted. Miss Marple walked slowly along familiar lanes, her breath misting in the crisp air. The villagers greeted her with warmth, not just politeness, but a genuine lightness that had been absent for months. At the village hall, a gathering celebrated the turning of the year and the healing that had begun. Leonard Gibbons spoke openly about the legacy of his family, pledging to rebuild trust. Lenina shared stories of Emily Herkridge, her kindness ensuring she would not be forgotten. Miss Marple watched with a quiet smile. The mystery that had crippled Elmsworth was resolved, but more importantly, the village had found a nuisance of unity. As she returned to her cottage, she glanced once more at the frosted window where the name had first appeared. Though the class was clear, now the memory remained a testament to the power of truth, observation, and gentle wisdom, the heart of every village. Miss Marple knew there were stories waiting to be told, and mysteries ready to be revealed by those who looked closely enough. And in Elmsworth, life moved forward, brighter, kinder, transformed. Chapter 21. Echoes and New Beginnings. Though the main mystery had been solved, Elmsworth's quiet rhythms were gently disturbed by lingering echoes of the past. Some wounds, even when healed, left faint scars, reminders of lessons learned and secrets once hidden. Miss Marple found herself drawn again to Toth Village Library, where she helped Elalina catalog old documents related to Tato. The families entwined in the saga together, they discovered forgotten letters and photographs, each piece adding depth to the village's story and helping the residents understand the complexities of their shared history. With the truth unveiled and justice served, a spirit of reconciliation began to take hold. The villagers organized gatherings to share memories, to listen, and to forgive. Jane Marple, with her characteristic quiet wisdom, encouraged all to see beyond suspicion and fear, reminding them that understanding and kindness were the truest foundations of any community. As spring hinted at its return beyond the frost, Elmsworth looked ahead, not as a place haunted by secrets, but as a village transformed by the courage to face its past and embrace its future. Chapter 22. Threads of forgiven spring had begun to soften the edges of Elmsworth, coaxing tender shoots from the earth in awakening colors. Long hidden beneath winter's frost, the village, once shadowed by suspicion and sorrow, now stirred with quiet hope. Miss Marple watched as neighbors gathered in the village green, sharing stories and laughter rebuilding bonds strained by the past. The weight of old grudges began to lift, placed by a delicate thread of forgiveness. Woven through the community, Leonard Gibbons took a leading role, organizing efforts to restore Fairweather Cottage as a memorial to Emily Toller, an acknowledgement of both tragedy and resilience. Elenina worked closely with local schools, sharing Emily's story as Allison in courage and integrity for Jane Marple. The true transformation was not just in the village's physical renewal, but in the hearts of its people. She believed that forgiveness, like the fragile blossoms breaking through the soil, held. The Pareto healed even the deepest wounds as the sun set. Behind the ancient oaks casting golden light across the village, Elmsworth breathed anew, ready to write the next chapter of its story with kindness, understanding, and hope. Chapter 23, Quiet Reflections. Vonnie had settled softly over Elmsworth, and the village was cloaked in the gentle hush that accompanies the close of day. Miss Marple sat by her window, the fading light casting long shadows across her sitting room as she reflected on the journey that had transformed the village and herself. The tangled web of secrets, deep and full truths, and the eventual justice had left its mark. Yet, in the quiet that followed, there was also peace. The villagers had faced their past and chosen to move forward. With compassion, Jane's thoughts drifted to Emily Toller, her courage, her silence, and the mysterious name carved in frosted glass that had set everything in motion. It was a reminder that even the smallest acts could ripple outward, changing lives in ways unforeseen. As she placed a fresh sprig of rosemary into a vase, a symbol of remembrance and renewal, Miss Marple smiled gently. The past, with all its shadows, had taught Elmsworth resilience, and as the stars emerged one by one in the night sky, Jane felt certain that the village, like the constellations above, was connected by invisible threads of hope and understanding. Things